Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss. I'm the political dragon in our Bronx offices. I'm happy to be here with you today. It is August 15th, approximately 3:30 p.m., and we want to talk with you today. Well, we want to do something that most major news media will no longer do. We want to talk to you like adults, to provide you facts and to talk about the consequences of those facts. We want you to learn about the celebration that is happening around the world right now and how that is going to affect your life. We want to talk about one of the most serious incidents that has happened in American history, at least since 9/11, and how that is going to affect America and the globe for years to come. Now, before we start, we do want to say, if this is the first time that you are seeing our channel, we welcome you. We thank you for being part of our audience. We appreciate you. We want you to know that we do long-form political commentary. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on all the social media that the internet overlords will allow to hear what you have to say about all the issues that affect us. To be able to hear your voices from anywhere in the globe, because we believe in the First Amendment. It's not just an American principle, it is a right of everyone to speak about what is affecting you. So whether your government agrees, if the internet overlords like it or not, we want to hear your voice every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we hope you will join us this Sunday as well. So today is a very difficult day. It is an anniversary. Today is the second anniversary, in fact, of one of the most momentous events in modern history, something that we have not seen since 9/11. Today is the second anniversary of the Afghanistan rout, where America retreated from Afghanistan, giving up the nation to the Taliban. In fact, it was the creation of the first fully terrorist nation in the history of the world. The Taliban, a recognized international terrorist organization, was given all of the supplies they would possibly need to create an army and to take over a nation. And they have survived for 2 years at this point. The consequences of that are multiple and wide-reaching. It affects everyone in the globe to some extent as a consequence of that moment 2 years ago. Before we do anything else, we're going to look at this in depth, and we're going to look at all of the factors that happened and how it's affecting you now and going forward. But first, let's start off by going backwards in time. Let's look at how this started. We know that under the President Trump's administration, there were initial talks with the Taliban to be able to allow America to retreat and that government would possibly take over. But there were conditions on that. Those conditions were not met. The talks did not move forward. The Biden administration, when they stepped in, looking for the political gain of being able to say they were able to remove American troops from an unpopular war, moved forward to some extent with those Trump protocols, but not the conditions that were attached to those protocols. That led us to the fact that by July of 2021, we had the United States, under the Biden administration, the Commander-in-Chief, Joe Biden, demanded and removed U.S. troops from our base in Afghanistan. But even though the troops left, nothing else went with them. We left behind all the equipment, all of the weapons, all of the money. The base was intact. And we did this in one night. And during that night, we failed to tell our allies, the Afghan national government, we didn't tell them that we were leaving. Literally, we snuck out in the middle of the night like a thief, leaving our allies high and dry as they lost the entire base and the Taliban took it over. These are facts. They are indisputable. This happened. Whether you like it or not has nothing to do with it. But that was only the start of the problems in Afghanistan. As we continued in our coverage of this in 2021, we were then told that as the United States was making its mad dash to leave, the Taliban were rushing forward as fast as possible to take over every single area formerly held by the United States. And we had CNN going on to international news media to tell the people of the world not to worry because the Taliban were mostly friendly. Yes, indeed, folks, they did say this. This was on August 17th of 2021. Yes, indeed, folks, CNN went in front of the world to tell everyone, don't worry, the Taliban promised that this time they will stop their terrorist actions. They will no longer punish women. They will no longer enforce a very restrictive form of Islam, that they would open themselves up to the world. None of that happened. But that was the promise we were given, and that's the promise that CNN told Americans to make us feel good about leaving every American citizen behind, our allies in the Afghan government. We then found out, and we had a conversation with a U.S. diplomat, retired U.S. diplomat, former senior Department of Homeland Security official, Eric J. Caron. We had him on to talk about the impact that we would see because of the manner in which the United States was leaving Afghanistan. The manner in which had never been seen since the 1975 retreat of Saigon, and many would say this was far, far worse. But we continued our coverage, and on August 30th of 2021, we could see that the news media were letting us know, the United States, that all of the allies of the United States, the individuals that Joe Biden had promised the American people he personally knew, and that would improve international relations for the United States, fell apart. Our allies no longer trusted the United States. They no longer trusted Joe Biden, because Joe Biden didn't just abandon the Afghan people. He also abandoned the British, the Australians, Indians, and, of course, American citizens. In the numbers of, we now know, about 5,000 American citizens. We had planes taking off, one after the other, trying to rush to meet an artificial deadline that didn't necessarily have to be September 1st. And Joe Biden left everything else behind. He took most of the people, and he left all of the equipment, the supplies, and the money. Because the Taliban and ISIS and Al-Qaeda, all existing in Afghanistan in 2021, and even more so today in 2023, well, they weren't just satisfied with America leaving. They wanted to kill Americans. They wanted to kill the British, the Australians. They wanted to kill Afghans that had worked for 2 decades with the United States government against terrorism around the world. That cost the lives of 13 U.S. soldiers, hundreds of Afghans, and British nationals as well. It was a sad day. But it wasn't over, because immediately throughout August of 2021 and going forward since that time, we heard the Biden administration step up, especially on September 1st of 2021. Joe Biden stood up in front of the world and said everyone was out. All the Americans had left except 100. They accomplished something no one could possibly accomplish, that they had taken all of the American citizens and tens of thousands of Afghanis and took them to America safe and sound. Only 100 Americans who wanted to come home to America were left behind in Afghanistan. Now, we at that time, and many around the world, said, even 100 Americans being left behind were too many. That the purpose of government was to protect all American citizens around the world. That's the purpose of every government, to protect its citizens from threats, whether on domestic ground or international. But be that as it may, Joe Biden said there were only 100 Americans, and the State Department was working diligently to make sure those 100 Americans would be home as soon as possible. And then we found out on September 3rd that Joe Biden was wrong. It wasn't 100 Americans, it was 200 Americans. And then throughout the rest of 2021, by Christmas, we had found out the number had changed. It was at 1.6 Americans were there, 80 Americans were there, 200 Americans were there. The number kept changing. And we didn't know why. And then in January, when 120 Americans were still left behind after 200 Americans had returned back to the United States without the State Department's help, without the Biden administration who had abandoned them. No. At that point, Joe Biden, the Democratic Party, and the national and international news media stopped mentioning the word Afghanistan. It was verboten. It was a subject not to be discussed. And we found out that the lie of 2021, the most underreported news event of 2021, was that there were 5,000 Americans still in Afghanistan who wanted to come home and could not. There were 5,000 Americans hiding from ISIS and Al-Qaeda who were hunting to kill the Americans, to torture those Americans, and they have continued to do so to this day. And to this day, we still see dozens and hundreds of Americans are continuing to come back home from Afghanistan without the help of the State Department, without a word from the Biden-Harris administration, or fanfare from the news media. It hasn't ended. And that's why in February of 2022, we reminded all of our viewers, this wasn't over. The fact that the Taliban were in charge did not end this. The fact that America had retreated with its tail between its legs, leaving billions of dollars of equipment and supplies and the ability to continue to wage war in Afghanistan, it had not ended. That the consequences would continue, not just for weeks, but for years, if not decades. That this would increase the global conflict, that this would destabilize the peace in the world, not just in the Middle East, but the entire world. And we were soon to be proven correct, as everyone continued to wonder and never received the answer how many Americans were abandoned by the Biden-Harris administration. But the story didn't end there, because even in April of 2023, even though we saw a report that was held back so that it would not affect the 2022 midterm elections, politics again interfered with reporting of news, of informing the American people, of treating them like adults. The report finally came out and said exactly what everyone else in the world had already long known. This was a failure, a monumental failure, historic in its scope and its impact. The Biden administration, for its part, said, no, it wasn't their fault. It was the fault of the previous administration. But it was Joe Biden who gave the orders as commander-in-chief in 2021. It was Joe Biden who made the decision to tell the State Department to abandon thousands of Americans with no hope of coming back home. It was the Biden administration that cut off all communications with the American people about what was the status of those Americans abandoned. Of course, we saw that there were many consequences that came out of this. We have seen in the time between September 1st of 2021, and today that women have been poisoned. We have seen global terror increase and spread. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. That's what happened. Again, whether you voted for or against Joe Biden, whether you're a Republican, a Libertarian, or a progressive, whether or not you are involved in politics or not, these are the facts that happened as they were reported around the world in 2021 and since. It is irrefutable. And that is what is being celebrated today in Afghanistan. On March 14th of 2023, Nikki Haley, a former U.S. diplomat who is currently running for the Republican nomination for the 2024 presidential election, she was speaking at an event in Iowa, and she said, and I quote, "I think America right now looks so distracted, and when America is distracted, the world is less safe." We have been saying that since July of 2021. We have consistently said that the Biden-Harris administration have been so focused on the next election that they haven't considered the consequences of the policy decisions they have made. Decisions that have, as we see, impacted our relationships with our allies as well as our enemies. And this, in fact, has made the world less safe. And it has led to a troubling revelation today, not well covered by the mainstream news media. The second anniversary of the Biden rout in Afghanistan led to a celebration much like you're seeing here. What are we seeing on the screen? The most important thing that you can see here, those are American vehicles. Those are American weapons. Those were the gifts given to the Taliban, a terrorist organization that poisons schoolgirls. That is the gift of the Biden-Harris administration in 2021. This has enabled a terrorist or a terrorist state to exist in the Middle East and to destabilize the rest of the world. This is being reported by NBC, as you can see. NBC states armored vehicles. Those are American armored vehicles. An important omission being made by NBC News as they cover this. They deny the American people the honest truth. These are American vehicles that were given to the Taliban by the Biden-Harris administration by General Mark Milley. These are American armored vehicles with Taliban flags paraded in celebration in the Afghan city of Kandahar on Tuesday as the Taliban marked 2 years since they took power. Again, I want you to look carefully at what you are seeing here on the screen. What NBC is not honest enough to tell you, what the American news media wants you to not recognize. Those are American Humvees. Those are American guns. Those are American uniforms. That is American bulletproof armor. This is what the American government under the Biden-Harris administration left behind. This is why the Middle East is more dangerous today and why women are being poisoned, literally being poisoned in Afghanistan right now. In fact, Nikki Haley said it again today, and I quote, 2 years ago, the world watched in horror as Joe Biden withdrew from Afghanistan in a way that betrayed our allies and emboldened our enemies. And I showed you the evidence from that time. It did. She goes on to say, disaster followed. 13 American service members were killed, which we covered. China then afterwards grew increasingly aggressive towards Taiwan, In fact, they threatened to take over Taiwan by force. We've covered that on this program before. She goes on to say, Russia invaded Ukraine. In 2021, they started that process. They promised they would go into the Ukraine because America was no longer strong. We'll cover that in 1 second. And terrorists took over Afghanistan with the help of American equipment and supplies, something that NBC just showed you. She goes on to say, to date, no one has taken responsibility for the botched withdrawal. That is true. No one has been fired and no one replaced. Not one member of the senior military under the Biden-Harris administration have been fired or replaced. The families of the 13 murdered service members can't even get basic answers about what happened. Why was a terrorist allowed to approach hundreds of innocent civilians? Why were they allowed to blow themselves up in the manner in which they did? Why was security so lax and so haphazard? Why did it have to happen that last minute? I think this is important to understand because we know this is an ongoing issue. It didn't end in 2021. It didn't end when the White House decided to not talk about Afghanistan. It didn't end when the mainstream news media in the United States put an embargo on the word Afghanistan and censored any and every single media source that actually addressed how many Americans are still in Afghanistan. A question when put to Congress, when put to the White House, cannot and has not been answered. And let's be clear. Again, this isn't just about weapons. It's not just that we armed the Taliban and created an army that didn't exist before to make a military power in the Middle East that never existed before. It's not just that there are 5,000 Americans that have disappeared, that were thrown away and not seen again, but this has also led to women being punished for the horror of being able to read. Schoolgirls are being poisoned just because they know how to read and write. But the Taliban haven't forgotten. As we can see, the Taliban are celebrating. They're happy. They are thanking the Biden-Harris administration. But when we say the consequences have been far more than just the loss of a battle, the loss of political power, the worsening of international relations between the United States and its allies and its enemies, there's more to it than just that. It is a fact that as the Biden-Harris administration was running away from the Taliban, as they were running onto planes and trying to escape as quickly as possible, one of the things that we saw is that the Biden-Harris administration handed over the keys of the prisons to the Taliban. Who was in those prisons? Well, it was ISIS and Al-Qaeda, as well as members of the Taliban. Terrorist organizations. Thousands upon thousands of known and suspected terrorists were held in prisons across Afghanistan, and they were all released. Let me say that again. They were all released. Even the far left-leaning Axios News had to tell the American people on August 15th of 2021, 2 years ago, thousands of prisoners freed by the Taliban could pose a threat to the United States. But the threat doesn't end with the United States. It means a threat to Europe. It means a threat to Israel. It's a threat to Southeast Asia, to Africa. The threat isn't limited just to the United States. It is an international threat because global terror increased on August 15th of 2021. You don't have to believe us. Axios is telling you. The left is telling you. And in fact, we did see that NPR reminded us of this, although the mainstream news media hid this news. When NPR was talking about the second coup in Burkina Faso, a small African nation, one of the most important things that they happened to say about this that was obscured, left almost unmentioned, is the fact the power grabs in Burkina Faso, well, they were diverting attention from an Islamic insurgency whose violence has killed thousands and forced 2 million to flee their homes. That Islamic insurgency is called ISIS. ISIS was released from Afghanistan by the Taliban, and they then went to Africa, invading several nations, trying to cause several coups, like in Burkina Faso, affecting 2 million individuals, turning them into refugees, affecting all of Africa and Europe and the rest of the world. But that's only one of the consequences that has come as a direct result of what Joe Biden did and what the Taliban are celebrating today. Because there's also in Tripoli, on August 15th of 2023, 2 years to the day, we now see that Tripoli is in fighting. Some of the worst fighting that they have had all year long. Why is Tripoli fighting? As reported by the Voice of America, Tripoli clashes are getting worse because of the disagreements between the 444 Brigade and the Special Deterrence Force. Now, that Special Deterrence Force, they're the RADA Special Deterrence Forces. These are organizations, this is an organization that is focused on high-profile kidnappings, murders, drug and alcohol poisoning-related deaths, illegal immigrant smuggling, otherwise known as human trafficking, in other words, slavery, weapons smuggling, explosive smuggling, terrorist acts, and plots. And they are doing so because of their belief in Islam. They are a radical Islamic terrorist organization, and they are fighting in Tripoli. They are members of ISIS and Al-Qaeda that are fighting in Libya because they were released from prisons in Afghanistan. Again, another direct consequence of the Biden-Harris administration actions in 2021 that is destabilizing Africa, that is affecting the Mediterranean, that is affecting the European Union, it is affecting the world. Again, these things do not stop, and that's just the impact in Africa. We are seeing similar kinds of events. We have seen agents and members of ISIS and Al-Qaeda that have entered into Yemen, that have gone into Southeast Asia, such as in the Philippines. They are infiltrating countries around the world, including in Europe, including in the United States. There are 140 terrorists that have entered, or known or suspected terrorists, have entered the United States, according to Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security. We know this is a fact. These individuals are coming from ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the prisons that were in Afghanistan, threatening the world. And that threat doesn't end today, just as it didn't end 2 years ago. Whether it's spoken about or not, the threat is growing and it is spreading around the world. And it is directly a consequence of the actions of the Commander-in-Chief in 2021, Joe Biden. But so far, we have told you, how did we get to this point? We have told you that the threat exists and it is making the world a more dangerous place. And we have shown you examples of how it is making the world more dangerous, even in areas that you didn't notice. Now, the mainstream American news media has downplayed all of this. They have tried to hide the information from you if they bother to tell you about it at all. But that hasn't made you more safe. It has not reduced the threat, just ignoring it. But it wasn't the only impact. Even though ISIS and Al-Qaeda were released upon the world, the rest of the world also noticed what happened. they saw Joe Biden run away. And that had its own impact, because it was only after America had run away from the Taliban, had abandoned 5,000 of its own citizens, and left behind every weapon in Afghanistan, it was only then that we saw that Russia decided it was the perfect time to go back to the Crimea, to go back into the Ukraine, and to try and take the western portion and the southern parts of Ukraine, to take over the wheat fields, the uranium, access to the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, to continue a campaign of conquest that was started in 2013 under the Obama-Biden administration. That's just a fact. And that is exactly what they did. In fact, it was December 10th of 2021 that we were mentioning it on our channel with our audience, saying what Joe Biden was suggesting at that time was appeasement. He was looking at the 1938 policies of Neville Chamberlain, and he was looking to apply that to the Ukraine. That was his first thought was to stop Russia by appeasing them, by giving them the land that they demanded, and forcing the Ukraine, a sovereign nation, to just obey. Even there, we saw the consequence, and Russia and China, North Korea, the world saw the reaction that not only did Joe Biden run away from the Taliban, but rather than confront the generations-long enemy of the United States, Russia, rather than facing off against Putin, a man that Joe Biden called theoretically or supposedly called a murderer to his face, rather than confronting him, the answer was pay him off. Give the bully your lunch money. That was the first reaction by the Biden-Harris administration. That was not a display of strength. And thus the reaction was one that did not get Russia to back down. In fact, they moved forward. The consequences of that have been far-reaching in many nations around the world, and to many people, especially American citizens, which we will get to in just a moment. But before we get to that, where is it affecting? Well, it's affecting Poland and Belarus and the Ukraine and Germany and France, the European Union, Israel, and the United Kingdom, as well as the United States. It is affecting the world because when Russia decided to go into the Ukraine, the United States decided to have a proxy war. And we drove all of NATO into that proxy war. But as a consequence of that, Poland was on the defensive from day one. Belarus is a nation aligned directly with Putin. Some would call it a puppet nation of Putin and Russia. And they have been amassing troops on the Polish border since 2021. We have been seeing the reaction from Poland is to build up their wall, spending $400,000 for a wall to reduce the inflow of illegal aliens, many of them suspected to be spies, many of them there to weaken Poland in its defense against a aggressive Russia and Belarus. And that only continued to expand as we got into 2022 when 1.2 million refugees tried to enter Poland, which was destabilizing both politically and economically. But Poland wasn't the only nation being affected. We also have North Korea, and because of the decision that Joe Biden made in showing the weakness of America under a Biden-Harris administration, North Korea fired over 100 missiles and rockets and ICBMs in 2022 alone. Another 25 to date, at least another 25 in 2023. More rockets, missiles, and ICBMs have been fired by North Korea, threatening South Korea and Japan, than any other president in 4 and most presidents in 8 years combined. North Korea saw this weakness, not only allowing it to then step up their own aggression, but to align themselves with Russia in its aggression against the United States. The nations, seeing the weakness of the Biden-Harris administration at every step in increasing the global terror around the world, decided that this was the green light to allow them to make all of their aggressions known and to take steps to act on that aggression, thus driving North Korea and Russia together stronger than they had ever been previously or separately. And of course, this is putting current pressure on Japan and on South Korea, allies of the United States. In fact, South Korea is begging the United States to take this seriously and to protect them in a way we wouldn't protect our own people, to protect our nation by living up to the international agreements, the treaties that America made under stronger presidents in the past. Thus, we are now continuously going back to South Korea, to Japan, to Taiwan, trying to shore up Southeast Asia, as China also took the initiative, just like North Korea, just like Russia, just like Iran, in identifying the weakness and said they too will go forward. Russia said they will take over Ukraine. China then said they're going to take Taiwan. And now we have 3 regions of the world where we have seen an escalation of the danger, the threat of war, and we have seen a weakness in the United States. And of course, the threat, again, isn't just limited to China, to North Korea, to the Middle East. It's not just about America. It's affecting Israel. It's affecting Germany, Poland, and even the United Kingdom, where they had 2 Russian bomber aircraft were just over Scotland, threatening the United Kingdom and its safety. We just had the Navy of Russia and China combined buzzing Alaska. The threat in terms of military escalation around the world is obvious. And again, every one of these dominoes goes back to Joe Biden and Afghanistan, and why today the Taliban are celebrating and thanking Joe Biden, and the rest of the world is upset about it. That too is not the only impact of this. Again, the scale and scope of this is bigger than we can imagine. The big thing about the Ukraine is not only did they have uranium resources, not only did they provide access for Russia to be able to enter the Black Sea and therefore to enter the Mediterranean, threatening many of our allies in Southern Europe, but it also meant that food, wheat, and fertilizer to grow food around the world were impacted, and thus began a global food crisis. 30% less food in the world today because of what happened in Afghanistan. There is a crisis so bad that people are rioting throughout Africa, throughout South America, around the world. People are rioting and starving because Russia invaded Ukraine due to the fact that Joe Biden ran away, because Joe Biden was weak. Ukraine struggles to get grain out of the country. Why are they struggling? Because Russia has blockaded the Black Sea. They have blockaded the cargo ships carrying grain around the world, because Russia is starving the Ukraine economically and the world with food itself. The impact wasn't just military, it's not just economic, it also happens to be a human struggle. We're seeing the world be affected by geopolitics, we are seeing the world be affected by terrorism. All of these things go back 2 years. 2 years to the day that the mainstream news media does not want to tell you about, that the mainstream news media do not want to connect the dots. They do not want you to look at the news and to see what is being said around the world and what was said in the United States before they decided to suppress and censor the news, because it might cause you to vote a little bit differently, because it might make you view the Biden-Harris administration a little bit differently. And I wish that were the worst of all the impacts. One of the worst consequences of this, we believe, has yet to be addressed at all. Something that we feel is absolutely devastating. And that, of course, is the fact that the Biden administration, 3 times in 3 years, in 2021, in 2022, and now in 2023, Joe Biden has abandoned American citizens around the world. And we covered it in a short, just adding up the numbers. It's actually 30,000 Americans have been abandoned since the day that Joe Biden took office. I want you to understand that. 30,000 Americans. That's in Afghanistan, that's in the Ukraine, and that's in the Sudan. And you may say, but Mike, I don't remember that. You may say, when did all of that take place? In fact, it was February 10th of 2022 that Joe Biden went on to international news and told the world, Lester Holt asked Biden, what scenario could prompt him to send troops to rescue Americans fleeing from the Ukraine? Biden replied, there is not. He would not go and save Americans who were in danger. Before the war started, he would not send a C-130 to fly into Kyiv and to take the children of Americans in Ukraine and bring them to safety. A 2.5-hour plane flight. Something that would have cost between $2 to $5 million. Literally, not even a rounding error in the amount of money in the United States budget to be able to go and save American children abandoned in the Ukraine. And Joe Biden said, no. No news media, in talking about the Ukraine-Russian war, mentioned 10 to 15,000 Americans that were abandoned on February 20 of 2022. Joe Biden abandoned 15,000 Americans in the Sudan, following a pattern we have seen around the rest of the world. He did it in the Middle East, he did it in Europe, and now he did it in Africa. We have no reason to believe he wouldn't do it in South America or anywhere else. Joe Biden just abandons Americans. And the world sees that as a weakness. They see that as a reason not to trust their ally. And it has caused more and more problems. Perhaps one of the biggest problems being that we know for a fact that there are 175 Americans being tortured as you are listening to this video. As you are watching this video right now, as being reported by the Washington Times, we know that the Biden-Harris administration has abandoned American citizens to be tortured by ISIS and Al-Qaeda as we speak. And the news media doesn't care. This very straightforward admission, 175 Americans are still in Afghanistan, some held by the Taliban, being tortured by the Taliban. This is a story from March 23rd of 2023. You didn't hear about it. The story went underreported. The major news media ignored it and have not followed up on it. And Americans are being tortured in the hundreds, if not in the thousands, because of Joe Biden's actions. And the news media doesn't want to talk about it because you might change your vote. You might not donate to that next Democrat, because you might demand some kind of action to take care of these Americans, to bring them home, or at the very least to end their suffering and the hands of terrorists, which I don't think is that much to ask for. But instead, what we are getting is that the Biden-Harris administration is using $6 billion to buy back 5 American prisoners from Iran. See, Iran is taking advantage of this as well. Iran knows and supports Russia along with North Korea, along with China, against the United States. We are looking at you and treating you like an adult. These are the facts. It doesn't matter if you like the news or you dislike the news. Whether or not you like the implications or not, this is the world we are in. And we are treating you like adults to present the information and to tell you these are the most likely consequences. That Americans remain abandoned around the world. That the world has less trust in the leadership of Joe Biden and America as a consequence. That the geopolitical stability of the world has been reduced because of what happened in Afghanistan. That Americans are being tortured because of what happened in Afghanistan. Today is a 2-year anniversary, not just of the Taliban being able to be in charge. It's the 2-year anniversary of America failing to do what America has always done in the past: uphold freedom and protect our people. This is a 2-year anniversary of failure. We hope you've enjoyed this deeper analysis of the 2-year anniversary of the victory of the Taliban over the Biden-Harris administration, the defeat of America on an economic, geopolitical, and moral level. Let's not have a 3rd-year anniversary. This channel won't forget, even if the rest of the news media wants you to forget. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today. Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States, admitted he has not read the Arizona immigration law. I know it is a difficult task to stand up in front of our peers and say to Congress and say that Congress has failed to listen to voters.
You here at CPAC said yes to President Donald Trump in 2016, and I know you're going to say yes to.
She was very aware that she had the flag in her hands and that the flag was dragging on the ground. That is an intentional action. She knows what she is doing. She then drops the flag. Understand the logic, and we see this in social media on a regular basis, and it's something that Newsweek decided not to tell you about. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, a representative in Congress who is writing laws to deny American citizens their rights, has no idea what she's talking about. And they are against the vaccine mandate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you support that?
Last time I checked, there were not a lot of planes crashing into each other at airports, right? You can meet a very, very stringent accuracy rate when it's important, when it matters, like in federal elections.
The quote from Joe Biden where he is admitting that he is willing to lie to the American people.